Center for Academic and Faculty Excellence webinar. I am going to be spotlighting our speakers today and myself, just, because I'm the one speaking right now. But today we're going to be talking about how to prepare your materials for faculty positions. And I have two volunteers from the faculty to help explain specific materials for different areas. I wish I could have had more people from different schools, but we're going to start with this. And if there is enough demand, I can facilitate more volunteers from faculty positions from other schools. But right now we have Dr. Lucia Cantero. She's an anthropologist and she works at the School of Arts and Humanities. So she actually can go into a lot of breadth in terms of like what is expected. And then we have Tom Ducey, who's at the School of Educational Sciences, and he has a PhD in education, I believe. Uh, yeah, okay, perfect. So I'm going to go a little bit through overall requirements for faculty positions. Then I will talk specifically about different things, and then I will let Lucia and Tom go into the specifics of their own schools. I'm a professor at DBOS, the Division for Behavioral and Organizational Sciences. So I will be able to speak to faculty positions in psychology and in management, like business schools and things like that. Okay. So let's start with a overview of what we're going to be talking about. First, we're going to talk about how academic are very different from regular job applications. Then we will talk about the curriculum vitae, the cover letter, and the research statement and the teaching materials. And then we will do a little bit of a field spotlight for arts and humanities, where Lucia will give us some talking points that she has been thinking about, and also the field spotlight for a School of Education. And then we will hone in on the idea that you really need to tailor your application to institutional context and how you should think about your own professional identity as you're doing this. Is that okay? Okay. So, academic versus regular job applications. In the industry, when we're looking for non-academic positions, usually the industry wants to have a resume, 1 to 2 pages max, because they just want to screen through applicants very fast and go like, okay, they have the competencies or not for this job. However, in an academic position, we are not looking only for the competence, but for the potential. Especially in assistant professor roles, you are not going to have a lot of things that you have done, and the things that you have done, you are going to highlight them a lot. But we are looking for actually like how well you're presenting yourself, how well you're thinking about your research lines, how well do you think about your teaching philosophy, your mentorship philosophy, because we're looking for that potential for an assistant professor level job. Okay. In industry, you focus on the skills and accomplishments, and in academia, we look into the full scholarly record. We really don't care that much if you were an intern, not an intern in an organization that we're doing something related to the applied research that you would do. I would put that internship there. But flipping burgers at McDonald's, as important as a life experience it is, doesn't need to be in your CV. You don't want to add things that would take away from your actually scholarly identity. That's what we're looking for when we're looking at those CVs. So publications, grants, awards, like even if you did the dean's role like 3 years in a row, that has to be there. It has to show that you are a great thinker and an academic scholar. In industry in general, you kind of tailor your application to the job description keywords, and your cover letter is very brief. It's a cover letter that says, "Hey, I'm applying for this. See attached my resume." In academia, the cover letter is actually the one thing that people will read with a lot of attention, and that's where you're going to be putting a lot of thought, because it's the first 2 pages that someone is going to read as a sample of your writing in terms of what is your research, what is your teaching philosophy, and what is your service, like how good of a colleague you're going to be. So you have to also think that the difference between industry and academia is that the people who are reading the industry stuff are HR recruiters, human resources people. The people who are reading your academic and faculty materials are faculty. They're not only evaluating your potential as a scholar and as a professor, they're evaluating you as a potential colleague. So your cover letter has to show warmth and has to show availability for collegiality as something that we really value. Okay. Um, so the cover letter in industry is very brief, and the interview usually in industry is they're behavioral questions, right? Because the best predictor of performance is past behavior, or the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. So most of the questions in a regular job are about, tell me about a time that you had a conflict with a colleague. How did you manage that? Right? Because I want to see if you do conflict resolution, because this is going to be, I don't know, a customer service position where you're going to have to deal with a lot of stuff. However, when we're talking about the interview day or the visit to campus day, that is one of the most challenging things that you will do in your life, because you arrive to campus at 9 a.m. after having breakfast with one of your potential colleagues or the dean or the provost if it is a very small liberal arts college. And then you're going to be meeting with a lot of people, including students, student representatives, where you're going to be asked to give a research talk if it is a research focused job. And sometimes they ask you for a teaching demo. And we do that in Cafe 4:30 and 5:30. We work on those teaching demos. Sometimes they ask you to do your job talk in a way that it doubles into that teaching demo. And then you continue having meetings with everybody. By 5 p.m., you're exhausted, and they're like, hey, we're going to get you and go for dinner with you. And then during dinner, you have to behave like a complete normal human. You have to make decisions like, should I drink or not? Like, should I show that I'm collegial? If everybody's drinking, should I drink? Those are decisions where, like, if nobody is asking for drinks, you don't ask for a drink, right? Things like that. If everybody's asking for drinks, and if you're okay drinking, go for it. But you have to really like figure out what's happening after have been being exhausted the whole day, and you're like, oh my God, I just cannot self-regulate anymore, but I have one dinner to go. And that's where actually the faculty in the department are really like figuring out if they like you enough to have you as a colleague forever if it's a tenure track position. So that's how it looks like. The hiring cycle takes between 6 to 12 months. Why? Because it's not an HR manager looking at your application. It's faculty, and you know how busy faculty are. So it takes forever for them to go and screen all the applicants, takes forever for them to kind of figure out what is the shortlist. Then we usually, like at DBOS, for example, we have been doing online interviews with a medium-sized shortlist, and then we invite only like 3 candidates to campus to that one full day visit. Okay. So it takes forever. You have to set up those visits. And after you have done the visit, you may be waiting at least for a month to even hear anything about what's going on. So it's good that when you're in the visiting campus, if you get like good rapport with someone, that, you know, and if they offer to give them their phone number or whatever, it's not a bad idea just to just keep checking and saying, hey, I had a great time. And maybe they can give you some like tidbit of where they are at the search level. Like, have they made a decision? Or are they still like just kind of like trying to find time to meet as a committee to figure out who's going to be offered the position? But they will not tell you who, because also by the time that all the visits have happened, what the committee decides on is a list of people that they're going to negotiate with. The first person that they're going to negotiate, if that one falls through, they will go to the second one. But the second one doesn't know that there's second. until they come back and then, until they get hired and they come to the faculty and then they're like, yeah, you actually were our second choice. And you're like, that hurts. But you just get over it because you got a job. So I'm just giving you like a little bit of an overview of how it looks like. So you better understand why your materials have to look the way that they are going to look like. Because your target is to get invited to that campus visit, right? To show how amazing you are in a job talk and with colleagues and with the students. Okay. So before I go into the cover letter, Tom or Lucia, is there anything else that you want to add from your perspective on this overall high level explanation of what the process looks like? Lucia, you're muted. But there's no webinar that is a webinar without somebody being muted and someone and tell
No,
being.
that's okay. I could also save these comments for later as well.
No,
So
but go ahead, go ahead.
there have been moments where you might be invited to apply and sometimes no, I'm sorry, you've applied, you've made it to the later rounds and you realize that you might be a wild card. And I've had that happen. So sometimes you're representing a range of interests and knowledge that you didn't expect you'd be hired for. But don't psych yourself out in those instances. There's a reason why they're interested in cross-disciplinary dialogue, for example. But I've been a wild card in searches before, and I felt uncomfortable. You just kind of have to go with it.
Yeah, thank you,
Um,
Lucia. Yeah, that makes sense.
I'll explain better in more context later, but
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just add, when you come for that interview, it's really important to know who the search committee is. I mean, you should know all of the faculty in the department, but particularly the people you're going to be spending the most time with are the search committee and then the chair of the search committee. So really do your homework, work on their research. Not necessarily so much in the cover letter, like you don't want to overdo it in the cover letter, but when you're meeting with them one-on-one, be sure to signal to them that you know their research and you've read some of their stuff.
Mhm. Exactly. Yeah, that's very important. And we're going to be talking about it all the time. Every single package that you send to every single position has to be customized, not only to the university, but to the department and to the group where you're going to be applying for to join. You have to be very careful with that. There's nothing like looking at applications and seeing that they said, "Oh, I would love to join your school," when they're applying to a department because they may have, or they say that business school and they're applying for a psychology department. That cracks my heart because I'm like, oh, okay. And I do understand because I have done that myself. I remember the first time I was in the job market 20 years ago, I had to apply to 30 positions. So imagine how much can you customize when you're doing that, right? It's a full-time job. So, but be very careful. Use AI to double check all that and use a human partner as well to double check that, right? Like, I'm going to send this to this university. Can you double check that this is that I don't talk about another university, another department? Like, be very careful with the format and how it looks like and how it looks like you're speaking to that position in that place every single time. And I know it's a lot, but it is how it works. Okay. So the cover letter. The cover letter, a lot of people don't understand that it may be the only thing that a committee reads. Because in the cover letter, you pull out your soul or your heart and your philosophy in there. You grab them by the cover letter. I don't know if that's a good way of saying that, but it is what grabbed attention and tells the people in the committee, I want to learn more. If your cover letter is just a very plain summary of this is my cover letter where I talk about my research and I hope and I show you my teaching philosophy and the contributions and surveys are in the CV somewhere, we don't know where, and I just hope to be a good fit, that's not a good cover letter. That's a cover letter for a regular job, not for this one. Cover letter here goes states the position, where you found it. If someone invited you to apply, you say, Dr. Gonzalez Morales suggested that I apply for this position. Why are you doing that? Because you're already making connections of networking and saying, yeah, Gloria, who's known by this person in the committee, knew this person and invited to and made it. And it's funny because I was the chair of the Committee of Faculty Inclusive Excellence, where I teach the committee to not to let those things sway them, because I'm trying to get the committees to not to be affected by biases. But now that I'm teaching you how to write all the materials, now is when you're going to work towards those biases. You're going to name drop. And you're doing that during the interview, and you're doing it in your cover letter, and you're doing it in your materials. If you have worked with someone that is very important in the area, you drop their name. What I will tell the committee is like, don't look at names, look at only at credentials, and we don't want biases on that way. But what I'm telling you from the insider perspective is that even if they're fighting biases, they will be affected by them. So whenever you can put something in there that makes you look better, go ahead and do it. Don't overdo it, because also we're not that, you know. So make it nuance. And also in a one-line statement, you should actually make it very compelling why your scholarly identity fits into that position. Even if it doesn't, you want a job. So you want to create a scholarly identity that fits that job. Okay. But also you have to try to keep it authentic. It's just that you have to be willing to sway a little bit. And Lucia will talk about this idea of the wild card as well. Then in your research program summary, you're going to describe your overarching theme. So for example, my research is focused on improving the working lives of diverse employees in organizations. That's an overarching. And then I can say current work and future directions. I am currently working on a book or an article where I'm exploring the importance of relational cultures for this endeavor. And in the future, I will be doing more applied research on how those cultures improve workers' well-being, and connect it to the department's strength. Either you are adding to a community that is already doing that, or you are complementing a community that is adjacent, but you're adding, you're giving it a little bit more. Then after the research program, and this depends, if it is a research focus, R1 meaning like a university where research is really highly looked for, you start with research. If it is a teaching position where it's more like 70% teaching, 10% service, 20% research, start with teaching. Okay, so you want to fit it depending on the position. So the teaching philosophy and experience, we have a couple of webinars where we explain how to do the teaching philosophy and the teaching statement. Also, we do that in Cafe 4:30 and 5:30. So that part we will have you cover. But in terms of experience, highlight the courses that not only the ones that you have taught, but the one that you can teach. And of course, how you approach pedagogy, and a little bit of an evidence of effectiveness in the cover letter. Just a little drop of, look how fantastic I am. I am a great teacher. I'm a great mentor. Okay. And then after that, this is the contributions and service. That's where usually you highlight your commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion. If you're applying to a job, for example, in Texas, you may not use those words, okay? Because right now, those words are banned. But you may talk about how you are dedicated to supporting a student's development, okay? You can speak in code, so the people in the committee understand what type of mentor and what type of teacher and what type of colleague you can be. So that's where you talk about mentorship, professional service, and how much, and also even like if you have been volunteering as, I don't know, in the student association, you have been in the Senate, that is telling and signaling that you will be a colleague that is going to be willing to do a lot of service for the department. And that's something that more and more we're appreciating, because we're all up here with service in every single in no, I'm not talking about CGU, I'm talking about in general. And also, if you actually do things in a broader academic community, have you volunteered for conferences or professional associations? Those things are really important to just to highlight because remember, your CV, an assistant professor may have only 10 pages, but I don't need to be looking for this. You need to tell me that you have it and that, as I explained in my CV in more depth, or in my service statement or in my DI statement, this is the four things that I have done. So it grabs my attention. Okay. I'm seeing a lot um, of messages here. So and I'm trying to speak at the same time. So I hope that Lucy and Tom can go through it and we can and we okay, thank you so much. And then at the end of the cover letter, you want to again explicitly name the fit, how will you fit with the department and with the position, and name a specific faculty or programs that you will collaborate with. Like, what are the things like what is that you bring that will make the department stronger? For psychology letters, we usually take one to 2 pages to go through all that, and it's okay because again that may be the only thing that the committee reads and that's what makes them it's like an abstract of a paper or the first 2 pages on a paper where like you're looking for okay why should I continue reading your paper, so the cover letter functions like that, and address it to the search committee chair by name my name when possible because it shows again that you have done your homework. um, what are the norms in your fields, Tom and Lucia, in terms of cover letter length?
Yeah, I would say this is pretty similar to what I would expect in education. About 2 pages. I actually looked back at my cover letter for when I applied to my job at CGU, and it was exactly 2 pages, single spaced. One thing with education that I would say that you wanna mention, but be a little careful with is if you have classroom teaching experience, like K-12 education experience, I think that's important to link that with your teaching philosophy. I mean, I always try to demonstrate how my K-12 experience informs the way I think about teaching and advising. But if you're applying to an R1 university, they really want you to highlight the research and the publications. So that should not be something you foreground. And in fact, I've had people tell me at R1s, don't even mention that you were a classroom teacher because there's this kind of stigma associated. I don't agree, but I think you need to moderate based on what kind of job you're applying for. But definitely you should get it in there if you've had that experience.
Yeah, and I can imagine that there's ways of saying it like based on my experience teaching in the classroom, these are all my research, like this is how I have evolved in my research or things like that, or my experience as a principal, instead of highlighting it, but connect it always with research if that's the case.
Yeah, show how it informs and eliminates your research.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Lucia.
Just to add, and it's wonderful because I think Tom used exactly the word I had written before me, which is it's so important to moderate your language and to fit, obviously, the call, the job call. And in the arts and humanities, I'm sure you want me to specifically speak to that. And interdisciplinary spaces, it's important that you moderate a legible language, a slightly more generalist language, especially if your research tends to be jargony. For example, I'm an anthropologist. We are notoriously jargony. Some of the challenges I faced was really figuring out what kind of language to use, not just the structure, but really the language that someone in the broader social science would understand about my project, someone in the arts and humanities would understand about my project. So I spent a lot of time really kind of attuning the language to the call. And it really felt like I was doing jazz hands and it was a lot of work. And I'm sure many of us can relate to that, but it's the job. It's part of the market is really making that fit really highlighted. And sometimes the faculty that are reading it can tell when you're stretching. So some of I think the pitfalls are clear when you're trying to make an application fit a call that doesn't fit you. I wouldn't even waste my energy or bandwidth on that anymore. I used to. I don't do that anymore. But really, I wrote it in the chat. I can't stress how much fit is and is an important element to this process. Like Tom highlighted, for me, it was super important to know the order of things. If it's an R1 institution, just like it's the same, really, these are, it seemed like very standard academic practices across the disciplines I'm listening. So for R1, I highlight my research first, always. But that intro paragraph, always generalist language so that the provost can understand it. So that that first paragraph becomes really important in staging your research question in a generalist lens, but also really important to stage your intervention there because research one really want to show the way in which you're contributing to intellectual knowledge. So for me, figuring out, oh, is this an R1 institution? Is this an R2 institution? Or is this a teaching college? Those are the first kind of questions I guess I asked when I was writing the cover letter so that I could moderate accordingly. Then the kind of language I used, I had to stress a lot. I'm an anthropologist, so we spend a lot of time in our research talking about methodology. I think never forget to talk about your methodology in the cover letter. It's probably one of the most important things that we think about as scholars is the kind of methodology that we deploy to answer the research questions that we have. And it's an important one that the faculty will ask. These are things that we often take for granted when we're so in the thick of writing our dissertation. So for me, it was never more than 2 pages. The cover letter should never be more than 2 pages. I think people do want a sense of teaching and service, even if it's R1, but not till later.
Mhm.
For the teaching colleges, I put the teaching stuff, I made that paragraph bigger. And like Gloria said, I used lots of ex in-class examples. Some of the things I did, I always kind of in the most truncated way possible. Didn't just sort of talk about the theory of what I do in my teaching philosophy, but it was important to show, not tell. So when I'm writing a cover letter, I tell, and the way that I would advise it is to tell students to use a language that shows and not just tells. So an emphasis on show, not just tell. Show what you do, not just tell what you do, for me was really, really kind of helpful. And it takes a lot of practice and time, but after a while, you do get a better feel for what I'm trying to answer Adil's question. What do you, there is no best strategy. It's the emphasis on what that institution is looking for. You should then emphasize. Adil, I hope that answered your question. So if it's an R1, it's a research one institution. Their priorities are research first and foremost. If it's R2, it's both. Teaching and research is put on the same scale. And if it's a teaching college, teaching will become the highlighted protagonist of your cover letter. But they should all have 3 sections for research, teaching, and service, no matter what. It's just what you choose to highlight changes depending on the call. And then choosing a language that's both generalist and appeals to the people in that particular discipline is also important. So like Tom said, moderating things for the fit is super, super important. Is that good? Should I add more,
Is,
Gloria?
is research two, is R2 kind of in between teaching college and R1 in terms of what they're looking for?
CGU is an R2. So like it's there's very few R1s. Most universities, I would say, are R2. They're expecting good teaching and but also strong research, strong scholarship. But an R2 is like in R2s you find people that they're such good researchers and get so many grants that they don't teach at all and they don't care that they don't teach. That's kind of like the definition more of an R1 is different from the rest, I would say. I don't know if Lucia, do you agree?
I agree. I agree. I quite love the medium and the space I'm in right now because I do find the emphasis to feel very balanced for me as a pedagogue and researcher.
Mhm.
There's something that I'll add about, and this may be specific to education. We have a pretty heavy advising load, and not everyone is prepared for that when they come in as new faculty. In fact, we very rarely hire brand new assistant professors because we know that as soon as they come in, they're going to have to be advising lots of dissertations. But this is something that you wouldn't really know about unless you did some real in-depth research. But that's one you would be if you came here for an education job, you would be asked a lot of questions about your experience advising students. And that's part of being an R2. But at the same time, we have kind of R1 level expectations in terms of research and publications. So it's a tricky balance that you have to be prepared to talk about.
Yeah. One thing that I would suggest is like the ad is usually very well designed to signal what they're looking for. So again, I'm going to mention AI again because I find that sometimes it's very helpful. You can feed the ad to an LLM and ask it to create criteria for you. What is the criteria that they are most likely going to be looking at? And then you can see what are the things that you should be highlighting on your cover letter and in the rest of your materials. You can do it yourself by hand as well. And then compare with the LLM and result and see what's going on there, or do it with a colleague again. Like I always talk about LLMs as thought partners, right? Like not as a substitute for how to do things. In terms of on what you should be submitting. June is asking about submitting in different places. It depends on who are the chairs of those committees. If it is the same chair, I actually would contact the chair and ask them, hey, I think I'm qualified to teach all these things. Should I apply for one and you put it through? Or what, like contacting people before applying is okay. Okay, you can ask questions. So you can do that. If it is different schools, go ahead and apply for all the different positions because the school, usually the committees don't know what else you have applied for. It depends on the system, but usually it doesn't. And then in terms of length, they never ask you for length, but I can tell you that if I see a teaching statement, not the teaching portfolio. The teaching portfolio can be as long as needed because you're going to put a lot of quotes, you're going to put a lot of examples of syllabus, like and syllabi and stuff like that. But your teaching statement, your research statement, I would not go more than 2, 3 pages because you will, when some, like for example, for the DBOS assistant professor this year, because it's a very bad year and there's almost no jobs, we had to go through 70 applications. So when I see statements that are 5 pages long, I'm like, okay, I'm not going to read the whole thing because I don't have time to read the whole thing, right? So if you can be more brief and hit points. And another thing that is important is use bolding, use bullet points, use things that allow people to scam your application, to skim your application, not scam it, to skim your application and being able to find the information that they're looking for. Make it easy for them. Okay. It's like when you're grading an exam, like an essay exam. I love it when my students underline or use different colors to kind of highlight, like, hey, this is the response to this, and this is where I'm talking about this, and it's like, oh, thank God, this is helpful instead of having to read like all shorthand without knowing where the response is. Okay, so that's something important. Okay. Let's go into the curriculum vitae. It's going to be dependent again on your discipline, but you want your contact header, an oral CID if available, and if updated, that is your ID as a researcher, or maybe instead of an oral CID, because I don't think that mine is updated or maintained, I put my Google Scholar ID because that one picks up really automatically all the stuff that I have been doing and I have been publishing. And also in there, I may put like Google Scholar and then the I index, that is your productivity index. But that would be for me, especially if I'm trying to go to R1, I would have to highlight that, or maybe not. I don't want them to know that it's too low, right? That's up to you, but they will figure it out. Then your education, your degrees in reverse chronological order. It's funny because in other, like I have a colleague who's an astronomer and they don't do reverse chronological order, they do chronological order. So it's kind of weird. Uh, but it depends on the discipline again. Asking colleagues who have gone through the process or your own advisor for examples is the best way to go in terms of formatting here. current and prior appointments in terms of academic positions, your publications, of course. Use consistent citation format, depends on your, again, on your discipline. In psychology would be APA. I think in school and education, maybe APA also works, but I guess that Chicago and MLA maybe also potential options there. But whatever you choose, use it consistently. And also separate what do you have as peer review, then as chapters, and there's things as under review. And then I also have another section that is in progress. And in the in progress, I actually put what is my target journal. So they know that I'm working on something that is going to be targeted to this high level journal in my area. Okay. So that way, when you put all that, they not only see what you have published, but remember what we were talking about, potential, they're seeing your pipeline. What is that is happening there? Okay. And if you're working with other people, put their names there as co-authors, especially if there are people that are going to ring a name, their name is going to ring a bell for them. Okay. Remember the networking. Then grants and funding, any funding, even if it is $500, even if you got the Raspberry Research Award that is for dissertations, feminist and graduate research. That's $500, but it sounds awesome. So you put it in there, okay? Teaching experience, the courses that you taught and the role, either instructor or TA, and what kind of enrollment they have. I saw staff people saying, "What if you don't have teaching experience?" Well, you need to have teaching experience. This is one of the reasons why in most of other portfolios for the PhDs, we're asking for a teaching experience component for your portfolio to be finished for being able to get into orals and become a candidate. I know it's hard. So other things that you can do when you're TAing, try to get your prof to allow you to do a couple of guest lectures that you would design from beginning to end. Try to ask professors if they need help designing a course. All those things are teaching experience, even though you're not the teacher or the instructor of record. And then in terms of service, divide it as departmental service, professional service, and community service. Show that you are someone that is not just doing the research and doing nothing else. Okay, you need to show that you are going to be a good colleague. Tom and Lucia, what else I'm missing here?
I mean, I think that you've really covered a lot of grounds, and I'm starting to see that there's similarities, but we're also both in the social sciences broadly construed. Really, we just have to hope the market opens up for many of our students. That's kind of a big one. Can you repeat though the question you were at? I was responding, unfortunately, to the
Oh
chat.
no, I just was saying if there's anything else that you needed to add.
Let me see. I'll never forget, just some sort of sound bites from my past on this, which was, I'll never forget one of my advisors from grad school. I had been quite frustratingly long on the market. And to be fair, I think many of us were probably on the market long I was. And it took a long time for me to find the right job that fit. But I was frustrated and I was sort of dealing with the tension on whether or not to be too theoretical. Was I being too theoretical in my cover letters? Were folks not understanding my research? And then I'll never forget that one of my advisors said that if they didn't understand my work, I wouldn't want to be there. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So sometimes, stretching yourself is not a good thing because it might not be the right institution but you just never know. So at the same time, throw your name in the hat. But beyond that, if you don't get to the next round, like folks are talking about, please don't take it personal. I think that's one of the biggest things to remember in the job market is that they're looking for reasons to say no. Not for reasons to say yes, unfortunately, because of the numbers game and the ratio game and the fit game. And sometimes they've already decided who they want to hire and understand that they need to open up a call. So sometimes you'll never really quite understand the politics behind these searches. So sometimes I think it's really wise to be kind and gentle to yourself in the process.
Yeah. And also, you never know who's going to remember your application for the next and then invite you to apply.
Another thing I would add is some folks in the audience might be thinking publications. I don't have any publications, or I have one publication, and that's something that builds up over time, right? So I would say, it's at this stage, it's difficult to have different sections of like for peer-reviewed articles, for invited, presentations, that kind of thing. So I'd like start kind of general in those headings and then break it down more specific over time. So you could start with a heading that's something like publications and presentations. And then as you get publications, you can start separating it out. Um, but if you just have a section that's just peer-reviewed articles and you have only one article, you might want to aggregate that with other publications or presentations.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so that's the CV. The research statement. I would always kind of structure it in where you've been, where are you now, and where are you going. And remember that this is directional. This is not what who you are. This is what you have done or where you have been doing research. Okay. So the core questions that your dissertation address, especially in if you're finishing up, the key empirical findings and contributions, the publication of manuscripts that are coming out of that work. And then I think that it's important to create like a line through this, like the what I learned from my dissertation and now how does that inform what I'm doing right now? The active projects and ongoing data collection, collaborations with other teams or with other people, and the current grants that you have, or if you're seeking funding, you put it there. Like I have applied to all these grants. Like you have to show that you are doing the work of getting funded. So even if you don't know the result yet, you put the ones that you have applied for. And then you also talk about where you're going. So do not do more than 2 or 3 research lines because committees find more than 3, like 4 or 5 too unfocused that you haven't created a scholarly identity. So try to and even if you have 5, try to bring them down to 2 or 3, like kind of group them together in a way that it shows that I'm doing this work on diversity and inclusion. Like my research is more in belonging, but I also do work on incivility in the workplace and I do work on stress in the workplace. But it really all comes from the idea that all these things are related to the worker experience and how it's affecting their health. So, like I have 3 very different things going on, but they look like they're in the same direction. What is going to be your funding strategy? Are you going to apply for NIH, NSF, different foundations? NIOSH, don't apply for it. There's no money there anymore. Uh, but that's an I don't think that. Yeah. Well, anyways, it's there because I put together these slides and I didn't realize that I was putting NIOSH as the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health. And also, what is important is that in your research, you talk about how you doing research in that institution is going to fit the institution mission. So go to see the mission and the vision and the values of the institution, also the department or the field group where you're going to be, and try to fit it. As I said before, fit can be either complementary or additive. You can bring more to something that the department is doing already very well. If there's already a lot of researchers on an area and you are in that area, you're going to contribute to make this department like the flagship of this field. And if your research is more complementary, then you talk about how you bring an additional perspective to answering the problems of humanity. I don't know. Things where you add or you complement, and that's the way that you play with that. If they're looking for adding and you don't have anything to add, that's where Lucia is like, you can apply, but don't, is they are looking for a criteria that you don't have, and that's what it is. Is there anything else about the research statement? Sorry, I went. But
There's one thing that I learned when I was a new assistant professor is a lot of times they're looking to see if you're converting conference papers into publications to um, to make sure that you're following through, that you're persevering on your research agenda, and that there's this kind of common thread. So that's something that you might write about how you've presented on this topic and then you've published from the topic.
yeah, yeah, that makes sense. I see stuff about teaching demos in our 4:30 and 5:30 courses. We actually work through teaching demos and we give you feedback on how to do them in a way that should fit most teaching colleges. If you're interested in learning more about that. Okay, teaching materials. You have your teaching statement. So we have a checklist in Cafe in resources on how to do it. There's also, again, we work on creating a teacher statement in Cafe 4:30 and Cafe 5:30. So really like work with it and think about it as something that is going to be evolving as you continue in your career. My teaching statement from 20 years ago has nothing to do with my teaching statement right now. And I keep updating it, not because I'm looking for jobs, because it helps me think about how do I want to do improvements in my teaching, also because my students change and transform as well. The courses that you can teach, not only the ones that you have taught, but the ones that you think that you're skilled to teach. Try to match offerings to department curriculum gaps, even include a new course that you will develop because you're super passionate about that and it would contribute. Like, for example, right now, I could see how an AI focused course related to the discipline would be something that people would be interested in seeing, that you're going to be doing something with that. Anything related to the technology of the moment is sometimes valued. But also signal versatility and programmatic thinking. I always have something like, but I'm willing to teach anything the department has needs on because I'm prepared to develop any type of course or something like that, like a sentence like that. And then evidence of teaching. Never put the raw data in there, but yes, student evaluation summaries. Try to have peer observations from others when you're teaching or other colleagues or other students. And awards. Teaching awards are great. Or TA awards or things like that. Show one sample syllabi that shows a good correspondence between learning objectives and activities and assignments, how all that is mapped together, like that you know how to think about course design. And also mention your innovative methods, flipped classrooms, active technological adaptations, and things like that. Lucia, Tom?
I'm just responding to, to the chat.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for doing that. I wouldn't be able to do all that.
No, I just kind of wanted to add to I think the thread I'm on and just say this is a tough market now. But it's always been a tough market. And it took me 10 years to get this tenure track job. Okay, folks? So I'm here to remind you that, and I hate sort of exalting resilience, but resilience really paid off in the end because I just kept applying and I kept applying and I kept applying and I kept applying and I kept applying. And I'm going to laugh my way through here. And ultimately, I found an institution where the fit was so seamless, so effortless that I said to myself, I'm happy where I landed, but yeah, 10 years is no small feat. So for those that have spent years looking for a job, it's more common than not. And I hate to say that about our industry. It just is. It's a fact of our industry at this point. Do you two want to add to that?
Yeah, something that is interesting is that it used to be only in the natural sciences where postdocs were something that faculties and colleges were looking for. And unfortunately or fortunately, now postdocs are something that they're looking for. They want people that are already like out of their PhD with a couple of publications, having experienced different labs or different ways of doing research. I did 3 years of postdoc before my first job. And I think that differentiated me from a lot of applicants that were coming directly from the PhD. So it takes time. It does. But also while on the postdoc, I was saying yes to adjunct positions that pay nothing because I needed this. So, and that's the problem. You need teaching experience to get a teaching job most of the time. And that's where, when I'm talking about connections, I know I hate it when career offices talk about this. I hate that they say that at the end, everything comes to connections, but it is what it is. And maybe just, asking and re-asking and sending mails to chairs of community colleges saying, hey, I'm available to teach anything that you need me to teach. Don't be afraid of teaching stats, or don't be afraid of teaching an intro class for 500 students. Just do it. Do it and get the experience.
And I want to add, going to those annual conferences for your specific discipline is key. This is where the networking happens, at the hotel bar, places you'd least expect. But honestly, there have been moments where job invitations have certainly emerged out of networking at those important places.
Mm-hmm. Lucia, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to go through the talking points that you have prepared that you haven't said yet, and then I will give another 2 minutes to Tom because we're at time.
Yeah, I mean, we've really talked a lot about what I had intended to talk about. I think the only thing I would add is, gosh, is the importance in depending on the discipline to think about methodology. I think for some reason, is it the social scientists in the arts and humanities in me? It might be, folks. But I had for example, I have two PhDs. I went to a grad school that offered a joint PhD program in a particular discipline with a side. So I have an African American Studies PhD and anthropology. And those are two, in my mind, kind of different disciplines, and it can be confusing. But ultimately, it's about really honing in on methodology, because you're selling to the department what you're going to teach, not just an area that you're going to cover. You're selling them an area of expertise and a methodology. So those are kind of the two main thrusts that they're looking for. Because we could get lost in the muck of trying to describe ourselves and our research, and we sort of have to remember, okay, key terms and a methodology. Try to keep it as simple as possible. But I'm also a very complicated thinker. So for me, it was important to remind myself to keep things clear and legible. But I guess that's the only thing I would add is to remember to never forget your methodology. That's a very important part of what we do. Yeah. And good luck. Stay resilient and don't give up on yourself. It's very easy to take this process personal.
Yeah, thank you, Lucia. And because the job market right now is really, really bad, don't take it personally. Tom, I'm going to do the field spotlight, and also this webinar is going to be put in our playlist in YouTube, and I can have the slides available if you need anything. I see that Tom already answered that question.
I've been sorry, I've been trying to keep up with the chat, but also want to speak to this field spotlight. I mean, definitely those in terms of the CB norms, those AERA journals, no, you should know about AERA. You should be going to their conference, and you should know what their journals, you should know their journals. I mean, those are the top journals in the field. So it's tough to have your first publication to be in one of those journals, but they're certainly aspirational. Um, the one thing I would say about the cover letter is field supervision. I would say that's more of like if you're looking for a teacher education job, that's certainly something you want to include, because if you're going to be working with teachers, you need to have research related to teacher education, but you also need to have experience working with teacher preparation. So if you have any kind of such experience, that's a really important thing to add. But like I said earlier, always this kind of balance between, yes, I was a classroom teacher, but now I'm a researcher. That classroom experience helped me to identify important understudied issues in education. Um, but of course, if you're going to a more teaching oriented position, then you can highlight that more. Let's see what else. Yeah, I would say this is pretty spot on, this slide. Um, and again, just want to emphasize knowing the position, knowing the match with the position, you know, altering all of your materials, cover letter, research statement, teaching statement toward that position, and be persistent and don't give up.
And don't
Thank
forget your 5-year plan because they want to know what your future. And I
Yeah.
know that Gloria kind of went through that really important part, but knowing what you're also about to do is so important.
Yeah,
And
and one other thing, Gloria talked about this earlier, but one of the things someone told me when I was a brand new assistant professor is you need a statement, 1 to 2 sentences that really describes what your research is about. Now, it can change over time, but you really need to be able to articulate that really succinctly and in a kind of a strong way because you're going to get that question all the time. And so you don't want to be saying, well, it's kind of I do this and I do that. Just something that kind of an overarching statement. Um, and I've more or less kept my same statement since I was an assistant professor.
Yes, that's what I call the elevator pitch, and is critical for business and for anything. You have to be able to verbalize in 2 sentences that don't bore somebody. What are you doing and what you are about and what you're passionate about. Um, we already talked about this, but I wanted to have a slide that really like highlights that you need to tailor to institutional context, customize your letter, customize what you're saying, but keep your authenticity too. Don't try to fit a circular or a round peg into a square. Um, and also try to be cohesive in your professional identity. Um, just tell one coherent story across every document. Like a through line could be that you are a very supportive mentor, and how that shows up in your research, for example, is how much you publish with your students or with colleagues in your lab at that point. How does it show in teaching is that you actually mention mentorship into your teaching statement and you don't only mention it in the teaching part. How does show up in service is that you actually have done service positions that are related to student services or student support. So if that's the through line that you want to create, try to create it throughout all the materials. And don't be afraid of consulting with your advisor, with somebody that has already gone through this, with somebody in another university that you may ask. Like, that's a good reason to go to conferences because you may find colleagues that already have those jobs that you want, and they may be able to mentor you through it. So send their materials, ask anything. No question is too basic, and always try to get all that feedback before submitting, even if it is from your mom or your sister. They will see things that you are not seeing because you're so into it. They will see that you're contradicting yourself or that there's something here that they don't understand. Because also what Lucia said at the beginning was really important, that you need a cover letter that the provost, who is from another field, chemistry, will understand when you're talking about anthropology. So your sister or your brother or your friend would be good at telling you if you have too much jargon or if it is understandable. And that's all I have for you today. What we have for you today. Um, I can stay for a couple of minutes if there's still questions that we haven't been able to answer. But I'm going to take out the spotlights.